It's time and we have a quorum. Since it rains today, I'm afraid there would be traffic congestion. This is the fourth meeting to the Bills Committee on Stamp Duty Amendment Bill 2017, and it's time to get started. First, I'd like to remind members on the rules on declaration of or disclosure of interest. Please pay attention to Rule 83 of the Rules of Procedure on requirements on declaration of interest. If members have any direct or indirect pecuniary interest on the items to be discussed today, please disclose the nature of such interests before you speak. If members had made disclosures of pecuniary interest in previous meetings, you still have to make the same disclosures of interest in every meeting thereafter. Let's invite the administration in. Good morning. We will continue to discuss policy issues in relation to the bill. First of all, let's invite the administration to brief us on two papers. First, administration's response to comments expressed by written submissions received by deputations and individuals, and we are looking at 930/1617(03). And the second is the administration's response to issues raised at the meeting on the 21st of April and Mr. James To's letter dated 21st of April. And we are looking at paper C(1) 930/1617(02). After the administration response, we will open the floor to questions. Thank you. First of all, 930/1617(03). That is the administration response to comments received from deputations and individuals. Since the time we had was limited, we were only able to share the papers last week. We provided written responses to comments from deputations, so there's not much we want to add today. So we will see if members have any questions, and we can elaborate more. Thank you. Any questions from members? Mr. To. Chairman, can she walk us through the responses? To be honest, I only saw that now. Deputy Secretary, can you walk us through the responses? We touch upon a number of policy issues with the deputations, including the demand management measures, and do they serve to increase supply? In terms of housing supply, the government is working hard to increase both public and private housing. And would the demand-side management measures push up the property prices or reduce secondary supply? In past meetings, members also touched upon this point. We explained this, the overall property prices and transaction volume. When we look at recent years, the overall supply and property prices have been rising due to different factors. We stress that we do not expect demand-side management measures alone to deal with the issue of property prices, because they are affected by a lot of local and external factors, bias, expectations going forward, etc. But if we do not implement any demand-side management measures, and for this current residential stamp duty of 15%, we want to reduce the demand from buyers who have existing properties. But we never said that this measure alone can drive down the prices. That's something we have said from the start. The government's view is that long-term supply must be increased, and we are working hard on this. We might touch upon some issues when we address Mr. To's questions. Last time, we talked about buying multiple properties under the same agreement, and we announced that the measure would be tightened, and in a while we will explain the legislative process. We also talked about the exchange period for buyers who want to exchange properties and whether the period can be extended. As we said in another paper, we looked at the issue. The current 6-month period applies the moment from the date of the conveyances on sale, and we updated the arrangement after we introduced the doubled ad valorem stamp duty. We want to strike a balance. On one hand, we don't want the measure to be jeopardized, but on the other, we understand that time is needed for people to exchange properties. So we thought that 6 months would be appropriate, and we can talk more about that in a moment. Some people acquire properties in the names of relatives in order to dodge the DSD. For Hong Kong permanent citizens, you have to make a declaration that when you acquire new property, you do not own any existing property and you are acting on your will. So if you purchase properties under other people's names, this is against the declaration, and it might be criminal. As I said, if you use other people's names to acquire properties, then you might suffer losses. If the IRD finds out that the declaration is untrue or does not hold, then the buyer might have to pay the differences, and it might be criminal. So we have been urging people not to break the law. So I think that's generally the case. Some people also ask whether property curves would be reduced gradually. We cannot expect how the market would develop in the future, so our practice is to pay attention to the market and take reference to various indicators. There's no way we can anticipate the market 2 years from now. That's why we cannot say now what we will do 2 years later, or else we might stimulate the latent demand. There were also suggestions that if a buyer sells off the property within 3 years at a loss, then the buyer do not have to pay stamp duty. The timing of transaction is up to the buyer, and it's also based on market condition. I think the government should not promise that buyers would not make losses in property transactions, so we do not find this appropriate. In terms of increasing supply, there were suggestions for the government to build more public housing. Apart from our supply target under the long-term housing policy, our 10-year target is 80,000. In the past few years, we rolled out public housing and subsidized sale flats under the Housing Authority and Housing Society. So hopefully the public would know that we have new flats every year. This March, the DHA allocated 2.1 thousand flats, and we will draw lots later. So these are highlights of our responses. Thank you. Any questions from members?
Mr. Chung, Justin Diaz mentioned that since we asked that there should be a 6-month period for people to exchange properties, we want to delay it to 9 to 12 months. But now, judging from public response, 6 months itself is not enough. Because if you want to buy a property, well, it's easier to buy a property than release your own property. Basically, as I said earlier, if you want to buy a property for exchange, not speculation, but at the same time you want to release your own property, the second-hand market now, relatively speaking, is rather inactive. So if there's only a 6-month period, you can see that it's really not enough. In the paper, it says that there are worries that if the same person owns 2 properties at the same time, if the period is lengthened, then the supply will shrink. But if I'm exchanging one property for another, then I would prefer to release my ASAP because it will have much pressure to hold 2 properties at the same time. Of course, raising it to 12 months may be longer, but how about providing it with visibility like from 6 to 9 months? DS? I think in the past we discussed the length of the period. As for the 6 months period proposed, of course it depends on what sort of new properties the buyer has in mind. If he's going to buy a second-hand flat, then maybe the transaction can happen more quickly. But even if he's buying a uncompleted flat, in 2013, when we brought in the AVD, the 6-month period is counted not from the day he bought the property, but when the assignment, from the day of assignment. So therefore, even if he's buying uncompleted flats, it will be counted from the assignment date. Well, the completion date varies from can be up to 30 months. So the calculation of the 6-month period should already include adequate flexibility. And when the person wants to get the refund, after he's got the new property, he can apply within a 2-year period for the refund. So as long as the person is eligible, there is a time frame, till when he can get the refund. If you want to extend any period, the Inland Revenue Department would not know who are the small owners or who are trying to hold 2 properties on purpose. So we need to consider that when the policy is implemented, we need to be mindful of letting people hold 2 properties at the same time, because we want to, achieve, our own purpose. And also in the market, local banks, as for people exchanging their properties for another, they have bridging loans or transitional loans for the buyers. And these transitional loans normally last 6 months. So therefore in the market, there is some kind of assessment that would put 6-month period for exchanging flats as a reasonable time frame. So having considered all those factors, we think that the period concerned for getting a refund, the 6-month period, we think that is relatively appropriate. Of course, we cannot rule out everyone's scenarios, which could differ from one to another. But when we implement a policy, we need to consider, the most likely scenarios. So therefore, we think the 6-month period seems a solution that has struck a balance. Chairman, but buying uncompleted flats, flats that won't be completed in 30 months. I think they are really rare. DS, do you have any statistics on, like, now that with the 15% stamp duty imposed, then any changes or any comparison in the number of transactions in first-hand and second-hand markets? If I buy a second-hand property, I would like to release my old property ASAP, otherwise I cannot afford the new property. Even if the banks are providing transitional loans, they will charge you interests. So, for normal exchange of property, the small owner would very much like to dispose of their own property first instead of having to wait for 9 months. So if you give them 3 more months, that will give the buyers more flexibility and take off the pressure a bit. And after the 15% stamp duty is imposed, have you got any figures on the number of transactions, purchases of uncompleted flats and other properties? Well, I think in another paper, in 930/161702 NSC, it actually offers some statistics as requested by members. It provides from 2010 to 2016 and January up to February 2017, the number of transactions there. And that's the figures you can read for your own reference. Just as Mr. Chung mentioned, for some people who want to exchange properties, if they're short of cash, they want to get rid of their own property first, then today, if you want to sell your own property first, then there's a way out for them. But for individuals who would like to take a different path, then of course it's up to the individual concerned. James To? As for the 6-month period, I think that you need to look at the volume of transactions. Firstly, you can buy a property in the first-hand market, but for selling your property in the second-hand market, the time frame now for transactions of second-hand properties, how does it compare now with the past? Transactions of second-hand properties, like if you want to exchange a property for another, you may want to exchange for a smaller or larger, but usually you want to go for a larger property, right? In an exchange. So you should be selling a property that costs less and buy a more expensive one instead. Of course, different properties vary. NXC, paper 930. Say between $3 million to $4 million properties. January and February, about 500 cases. In a year, that means that will comes to 6,000. But early on, tax were imposed there. Well, 9,000, 12,000. That means, look at the properties of $3 to $4 million. The number of transactions is less. $4 to $6 million. 900 something. So year-wise, times 12, it will be like few. Numbers few. 6 million to 20 million. The range is too wide here in this category. But this is the only figure you have. But if you look at the figures here, 800 here, like 9,600 times 12. So 10% less compared to 2015-16. So I'm thinking, so for a property that's sold that costs about $4 million, and you buy a new property with an extra 100 square feet, so $5 to $6 million. So for 3 to 4 million property, if you look at 2 to 3 million properties, the reduction in the number of transactions is higher or bigger. So if you look at number of transactions as one indicator to judge whether a 6-month period is enough, then these figures seem to be convincing enough for you to extend the 6-month period. I don't know whether you think this is convincing enough to you. Chairman, I just asked my question. James To's question. Do you think the figures are convincing enough to you? That is, if you want to sell a flat, there are actually less transactions now for properties being sold out. Chairman, I don't know how I should look at these figures and what you think. These are just facts. The figures are just facts provided based on members' request on the number of transactions in first-hand, second-hand markets. So it doesn't mean that if you want to sell a $2 to $3 million property, then you will get a $3 to $4 million property in return. There's no definite causal relationship here between these figures. And also, property prices vary throughout the years. I can't say that you have sold this and then you can get another property more easily. And people exchange properties in either first-hand or second-hand market. So whether we can draw conclusions from these figures, well, I'm not saying that he's selling second-hand to buy first-hand property. I'm saying that I'm just looking at whether he can sell his second-hand property, because the transactions in second-hand market will be the most objective factor. That is because when you dispose of a second property, that would lead to you're buying a first-hand property. So you have to prove that when you sell your own property, so you have to look at the number of transactions here in the markets. Second-hand property transactions, sometimes it's difficult to generalize, because whether a deal is closed really depends on the prices offered. So if someone thinks that he's not satisfied with the price, then he may not want to dispose of his property. But another person may be very anxious to sell his property to get a new one. So therefore, he may be willing to sell even if he suffers losses. So if each person's considerations are different, so we cannot guarantee that because he has to pay for a new property, then he won't sell his previous one or existing property even at a loss. So I can't decide on whether 6 months is enough based on that factor alone, because it's very much dependent on the individual. Well, it's meaningless that. Well, so I think the administration would insist. Well, I just want to argue with them. This is all put on record, and people can listen back to our exchanges. Maybe they think that I'm being not reasonable, but I want to tell you what I think. Why do I think the government is being unreasonable? Because the new tax concerned, say, now you have the new tax, right? In the context of the new tax, when you exchange properties, that means you are going to sell your old property, a previous property, or existing property to buy a new one, right? But the DS said, well, you can do it in 3 months, because you can just sell your property at a loss, reduce price by 10, 15, 20%, then there will be buyers. But that's not reasonable. The government cannot get that's not a reasonable ground. You can't expect the public to cut the price by 40% to regain the refund of the tax, right? For any normal human being with a sound mind, they wouldn't do that. So what DS said is meaningless. Of course, he just said that someone may sell his property, not necessarily when there are profits made. But we hope that in a proper market, when you are considering the exchanges, you would make reference to the prices in the past 6 months. So there may be a few percent increase in property prices, maybe 6% increase.
幾年嚟講呢係幾多？今日我就話啦，半年。
For the between 6 months and 9 months, with an extra 3 months, would they speculate on their properties for another 3 months, or would you ask them to pay an extra 5 to 10%? That's the matter. I assume that they sell their properties at market prices. Would 3 months or 6 months be okay? If there's a 1 or 2 fluctuation in the market prices, then I think we should look at the transaction volume. That would be the best approach. I think the government has heard Mr. To's comments. Next, Mr. Abraham Shak. Chairman. Apparently, the government has provided responses to various comments, but basically those answers are the same. We have been talking about property curves for many years. The government has been so stubborn. Whatever we say, they do not listen. When you answered Mr. To, you did not give your reasons. You just need to give your justifications why you insist on 6 months instead of 9. And the law should be readily understood by the public. Whether or not they make profits or losses, it's their business. You should not stand in the way of people making profits. Your attitude is highly inappropriate. I have a declaration to make. I represent the real estate sector. Your responses are unreasonable. There are public calls to extend the period. You did not explain why you couldn't extend the period from 6 months. You merely said that buying properties are a personal choice. Of course, that's obvious. So you have to explain why you insist on 6 months and what are your justifications. You shouldn't criticize others of their situation. Mr. James To has said very clearly. The Deputy Secretary said the policy is not about demand-side management. Starting from the previous term government, this is already the 4th property curb. Has they ever been successful? Have you reviewed the shortcomings of such policies? But you insist on them. Then the government would do whatever they want. The CY Leung administration would do whatever they want because you have the power. Since 2012, the property prices have gone up 52%, and you said you have been successful. Well, you might tell us that the prices would have gone up by 100 or 200% if you didn't do anything. Well, you can do whatever, say whatever you want. Well, the secondary market has suffered seriously, but I sympathize with the government. And the accountable officers are not here, and every time we only see civil servants. So I really sympathize with you. So I would not just casually criticize you because you are just doing your job. But the accountable officers do not dare come here. So I don't understand why this is taking place, what is meant by accountability. And I'm very surprised the government did not provide English versions of the papers. I hope they can provide English versions of the papers. Or why didn't they come up with the English version? What about for those who cannot read Chinese? Mr. Jack. The Chinese versions were shared on the 12th of May, and according to the Secretariat, the English version would be ready after the meeting. There shouldn't be any priorities in the papers. But there are, well, after the meeting today, I think the issue would be ignored. That's not the way to go. If that's what they are going to do, let's not meet at all. Well, I'm referring to the government. Your responses completely ignore the comments. Well, that's not your personal vote, Deputy Secretary. Just now, the Deputy Secretary talked about selling first and then buying. I wouldn't deny such scenarios. If you sell a property first, and you won't have a home. So that's the common sense thinking. So by common sense, people would usually buy before they sell. Well, so selling then buying is actually not feasible in the 6-month period. Let's not talk about assignment or pre-sale flats. So what do I have to do within 6 months? First of all, sign off the property renovation, move in, and sell my old property, and at the end a deal is made. Can so much be done within 6 months? And if I proceed to renovation, it easily takes two months or more. If the renovation can be done within 60 days, I would be very happy. And nowadays, renovations take 3 months or more. By the time, I have to move in before I can vacate and sell my old flat. So I only have 3 months to sell my flats. Well, even if I want to sell it, I need buyers who are interested. So buying and selling are both not easy. Mr. Christopher Chung only asked for an extension from 6 months to 9 months, so the government should consider that. Not trying to. You should not talk about profits or losses or things like that. I think members are all objective when discussing policy issues. I think the biggest concern is the 6-month period. Hopefully the government would not come up with excuses with regards to our requests. Mr. To. If there's an exchange of properties for people who want to improve their lives, the pre-sale period might be up to or more than 20 months. That's why more time is available for exchange of flats. So, in other words, you are helping those who want to change properties to buy first-hand property. So members like Mr. Sheck should thank you. So C.Y. Leung and Anthony Chang are objectively helping or encouraging people who want to exchange flats to buy first-hand properties. I wouldn't say there's collusion between C.Y. Leung and Anthony Chang, but that's in truth the case. In the secondary market, the transaction period won't be as long as more than 20 months. I really cannot imagine that. For people who want to exchange properties, you can provide an extra incentive. And I'm discounting other reasons. If you can enhance the period from 6 months or 1 year, so this way the differences are narrowed because of tax reasons. Venue and prices are also other factors. So this would eliminate this factor. Mr. Christopher Chung, thank you. Figures don't lie. And prices have gone up substantially, and for new properties, the flat price is at least 13 to 14,000, and the prices often fluctuate. But when you look at the government's figures in paragraph 17 and in 2012, for second-hand properties, the average number of transactions is about 120,000. And by 2016, it's 30 to 40,000. So there was a drop of more than of 70 to 80,000 secondary flats per year. You were afraid about speculations, so the speculators would not make up 2/3 of the market. So it shows that the property curbs stifle the supply of the secondary market. The government might say that without the curves, the spikes were even higher. Of course, there's no way we can tell. We would not know what would happen if we didn't implement the curves. In economics, well, you have stifled supply. So that's why the figures went up by 52%. I think anyone who knows economics would understand. Well, when we proceed to the vote at LegCo, I would vote against the 15% because it simply won't work. That's why we want to request an extension of the exchange period from 3 months to 6. Ms. Asmak, thank you. I think we will be discuss these issues until the Deputy Secretary comes up with solutions. The paper says the suggestion by the chairman last time on using bank guarantees to pay taxes is not viable. We feel that the curve does not achieve the original intentions, or that end users would benefit. And these curves brought a lot of hassles to buyers. We are just talking about an extra giving them an extra 3 months. That way you can bring a lot more convenience to buyers. So why are our government encouraging people to sell their flats first? These were additional measures, and their aim is to help provide affordable housing, but this is not the case. On the other hand, you are creating trouble. So with the additional 15% of tax, the cost of exchanging properties has gone up, and a lot of work is needed. Why don't you take out administrative measures to help these people? Because well, it led to a lot of complaints from the society. Why can't you provide an extra 3 months? There are views that the government is helping the developers instead of the public. And you cannot compare the secondary market with the primary market. The primary market is certainly rosy. Is this what the government is trying to do? Anything in response from the Deputy Secretary?
Let me apologize again. Before Abraham Sheikh went in, I said that because we handed in the paper quite late because we had to check some figures. Therefore, the English version could not be produced in time. But we'll definitely give you the English copy after the meeting. But let me apologize once again. And as for your point about the second-hand market, that we are encouraging developers to sell first-hand properties. Well, when we discussed the AVD, it's not from it's not for 6 months after assignment, but ever since the agreement was signed. But you were saying that people who bought the uncompleted flats, have nowhere to move into in the meantime. So therefore, we suggested that we move the date to assignment date when the 6-month period comes into effect. So that's our consideration. We did not mean to benefit anyone in particular or put anyone at an advantaged position. And so why we can't extend the period further, whether in the paper or as I just explained in the beginning, we consider several factors. That is, if we were to further extend the period, once that's done, then we would, of course, the period would be applicable to all people who want to exchange their properties. So there's no way for us to know who are the real small owners. We understand that with the additional 15% stamp duty, it actually would bring more trouble to small owners because of the increase in upfront cost. But if you look at the whole picture, you need to consider that similarly, there are people who claim to be exchanging properties, but I don't know what their real motives are. So if we further extend the 6-month period, that means at the same time, for people owning 2 properties at the same time, they will be in possession of that for a longer period of time, and that may defeat our original purpose, because we want to increase supply in the second-hand market. Then if there are more people owning 2 properties at the same time, that would not be what we want to see. So for local banks, when they offer the loans, they set a limit of 6 months, and this has been in operation for quite some time. That means the bank's judgment is that 6-month period is appropriate. So having considered all those factors, we thought that 6 months should be appropriate. It's not that we just didn't want to listen to public opinions. In formulating any policy, we need to make it appropriate for most people, and we cannot make changes just because of individual cases. So I was just trying to explain to you the administration's view. Before James To speaks or asks questions for the 3rd time, DS, on what you just said, that you're concerned about people owning 2 properties at the same time. Well, we are just asking for extension from 6 months to 9 months. That is 3 months more, just owning 2 properties for 3 more months. Ultimately, one of the properties will be released. Otherwise, the 15% cannot be refunded. If you hold on to 2 properties for more than 9 months, he cannot get the stamp duty back. So just 3 more months. We're not talking about condemning anyone. We are looking at the facts, fact about whether is someone changing and second-hand property for first-hand or first-hand for second-hand, whatever. The entire process really involves a number of months. So we're just making the suggestion based on facts. The time frame needed for real users. James To? Yes, you really said it well. I think the administration really have to reconsider your rationale. That is, say, if you extend it from 6 months to 9 months or a year, okay, imagine owner A, who, because he has bought a property, so we're talking about someone who has bought a property already. Owner A, who's held on to a property and with extension to 9 months, say 2017 January, there are 2,000 properties. You said that not everyone exchanged properties. Well, of the 2,000 cases in January 2017, okay. There may be very few people exchanging properties by getting a new one. So maybe 1/4. That means 600 cases are holding on to their existing properties for 9 months and who are not willing to dispose of that. But how many people are willing to sell their properties to you, excluding first-hand? Because in every year there are 10,000 transactions of first-hand properties every year. And there are more than 1 million units that could be sold to the market. So that if there are 600 people holding on to the properties for 3 more months or 6 more months, okay, they may be like just on the sidelines, observing the market trends to see where their existing property can go up for 1 more percentage in terms of price. So there are actually in the market 1 million plus second-hand properties in the market, and those properties are always, in the pipeline. So just to wait for 3 more months, and in 3 more months there could be additional 2,000 first-hand properties, right, or 3,000 properties, right, and 1 million more second-hand units that are potentially available. So look at the number of transactions now. How can you see or think that the presence of 600 owners can cause further market speculations? I think your ground is really ridiculous. Doesn't make sense. I think Mr. To was looking at the number of units, but I, as a business person, would look at the actual volumes. If I gave up on claiming the stamp duty to wait for 3% increase in property prices. What's the rate for the stamp duty? It's 15%, yeah, for new flats, yes. So I wouldn't do that. If I were to speculate, I would be, of course, hoping for more profits. So I wouldn't go for a path that caused me to have more losses. So you need to convince the administration about the extent of risks and how many more people would hold on to the properties just because of the 3 additional months. In an irrational way, they are taking a risk of not getting the 15% just for the sake of 1 or 2% increase in an old, smaller flat. Yeah, he has to have an increase of 15% to make profits. Yeah, so you have to weigh the pros and cons. It's just not proportional, the gains and the loss. So the person would release the property whenever there are buyers, indeed. So under the old system, the 6-month period, maybe by the time 4 months have passed, and then the seller would think, well, there's the 15% cost, then they would just reduce the cost by or the value by 3%. So it's because of the government's 15% stamp duty, then the seller is forced to cut their property price by 3 or 5%. The government may be pleased to see that out because they're saying that there are people cutting the prices and that would undermine the market. But how much power do you have to influence the market? Yes, I think the administration has heard our opinions. I hope that you will reconsider seriously the proposal. Members here, okay, we are from various parties and we share the same view. It's very rare for members of various parties to have unanimous views. So administration, please reconsider your stance. If the government does not want to make any changes, I will propose that this bills committee under your leadership would try to initiate amendments, in relation to the 6-month period. Because the bill is mainly is about the 15% change. Well, I will discuss it with the legal advisor first and see whether we can move any amendments. I understand your request. Next one, Lam Kin Fong. Chairman, I'd just like to ask a question. So this new measure has taken effect. So ever since it took effect, can the administration give us any figures that is to show that the 15% is really effective? I think the same question was asked, but can the DS simply or just respond briefly? Earlier on, I think we mentioned that if you look at December 2016 when the 15% was introduced, because we announced it in November, and the data from December up to March this year for the new stamp duty and the SSD, every month there are about 460 transactions each month compared to September 2016. Every month there were about 3,350 transactions. So there was a 80% decrease, and more than 94% of the transactions, the buyers were Hong Kong PRs who do not own other properties. So that means that the trend complies with our goal, that we want to give priority to Hong Kong permanent residents first, and also people who do not have any other residential properties when they make the transaction. That is in line with our goal. But how come property prices are still on the high side? But as I've said many times, we never hoped that the 15% would immediately cause property prices to drop because there's so many factors at play now. Mr. Lam, okay, your answer is that once you've introduced the stamp duty, you never hoped that it could dampen the rise in property prices or to make the prices become more stable or even drop. So you didn't think that it would work. Then what's the point of introducing it? And also, since SSD, DSD were launched, property prices kept rising. It did deter some people for a short period of time, but from sale of land and also bidders for land sales and selling properties, there's no stop in rising property prices. So we have said it many times that that's the crux of the issue is the shortage of land. So therefore, you should act quickly. Some reclamation projects have been long approved. Why can't you go ahead with that? And lately, brownfield sites or green belts, for those areas we support, building on those sites ASAP. So if you have a measure that does not achieve your purpose or only affect or undermine the second-hand property market, measure that has no effect on first-hand property market, then people come up with countermeasures. Developers have countermeasures to deal with your latest policy. And yet, those who most want to buy property or in need of property cannot afford it. Then, would you reconsider and look into the situation more carefully and try to identify any loopholes in your measures? Every time you launch a new measure, you said that, well, I would hold you accountable legally or arrest any breaches of the law, or you said you would not rule out imposing more measures. But can you reconsider the situation and do a study and give us a paper telling us what are the loopholes?
Can you tell us of the loopholes next time? I think you can look at paper 930/16-17, Precursor 2. All the questions and loopholes we mentioned have already been responded to. Whether or not you like the replies is another issue. Yes, I read them, but every time people would suggest new ideas every time. I think we should look at the issue more thoroughly. Mr. Wuchiwai, thank you. In terms of property stamp duty, recently the Hong Kong Monetary Authority would try to manage the market exuberance due to developers. Apart from taxes paid by buyers and sellers on the market, are you working with the HKMA on tax arrangements? For instance, tax obligations of developers so that they cannot shift the responsibility to buyers. So would you work with the HKMA to try to manage the developers in the lead bidding process? In terms of tax issues, the THB is not coordinating with the HKMA, but we would know about their measures beforehand. The HKMA measured their initiative last Friday. So it's about bank financing by developers, and the monetary authority's view is to maintain the financial stability of the banking system. But our views might be somewhat similar, but we never sat down together, but they would notify us ahead of time. Property prices would not go up forever, but we have no way to know when they will drop. So we have to consider our own situations. The latest housing affordability ratio is 66%, which is rather high. That's why we remind people to make careful choices. As for other loopholes, we would monitor the situation, but if it's no longer an isolated case, but a universal loophole, we would constantly keep tabs on them. In terms of using tax measures to manage the demand, doesn't mean you would not consider such means. Would you work with the HKMA to help developers deal with their stock? So have you never considered such tax measures so that all developers in the market have to bear risks? Deputy Secretary, in my position, I might not be able to answer his question, but the MA has its own measures and they are somewhat related. I cannot say the relevant bureaus did not do anything, but we did not work with them on tax issues, but we do maintain communications. Mr. Wu, I suggest you submit a question at the Financial Affairs Bureau panel. Mr. Jeffrey Lam, Chairman. Apparently, the MA doesn't communicate with government bureaus enough in terms of curbing property prices. Different measures were implemented, and there are a number of loopholes. Hong Kong is a financial city, and if certain measures affect the operations of the economy, for example, providing quarters to staff members, these might affect a specific sector. Mr. Lam, this is the Bills Committee rather than a panel. What you are talking about does not relate directly to the bill. Chairman, the Deputy Secretary talked. Well, I will be very quick. When examining or reviewing policies, as I said, you have to identify loopholes that affect the operation in our economy. All right, during the last meeting, the administration briefed members on the exemption arrangements of acquiring multiple residential properties under a single instrument and the tightening of the new residential stamp duty regime. And we are looking at paper 3/1823/1617/01. We haven't discussed paper brackets 02 yet, right? We only discussed one point, which is the issue of 6 months or 9 months. They have not briefed us yet. This is paper brackets 02. This paper also covers the issue of 6 months and 9 months. Well, I have plenty of questions, Chairman. I hope she can brief us on the paper. She only briefed us on 930/03. Deputy Secretary, brackets 02. Can you brief us on that paper, please? Thank you. The paper responds to two main points. We were requested to provide figures by members, and Mr. James To also submitted another paper, and he requested a response. First of all, in Annex A, members requested us to list the number of residential property transactions by month. And in Annex A, we listed out the number of buyers who are not beneficiary owners of any other residential properties in Hong Kong when acquiring residential properties, when they what buyers do not have to share their ages, so we have no such figures. But we can at least provide figures on the number of underage individuals. So the IRD has such figures. As I said last time, in the same period, in other words, from December last year to April, the IRD did not receive any applications for stamp duty exemption from underage persons, but for in other scenarios, age information is not necessary, and we asked whether bank guarantees can be used to pay the taxes. That means the normal stamp duty would be paid upfront. Whether you use bank loans or if you pay later, the payment of stamp duty would be delayed under the existing Inland Revenue Ordinance. When a person applies for a stamp, he has to pay duty. So bank guarantees cannot be used in lieu of this. And banks are already providing transitional loans. If you ask for bank loans, they would not do it for free. So we are thinking whether people who want to exchange flats would receive bank guarantees. As for the period of 6 months, we have covered that. Mr. To asked about the situation of multiple properties under one agreement. We also shared some figures. So the number of properties acquired using a single instrument, which at least includes one residential property. So we have compiled a table on Mr. To's request. And in paragraph 11, we have multiple properties under one agreement. In the last meeting, we said that in April, the government announced tightening of the exemption arrangement for the new residential stamp duty regime. We talked to the Department of Justice and the relevant law draftsmen on whether CSA can deal with this issue or we need a new bill. At the end, we decided that a new bill was necessary. When we look at the scope of the bill, we wanted to raise the residential stamp duty to 15%. For other exemption arrangements, they will be unchanged. In the long title of the bill, or the LegCo brief, or in the statutory speech in the moving of the second debate, this point was repeated, and the DOJ felt that if we resort to CSAs, we would fail the scope test of the LegCo rules of procedure. That's why we need a new bill to deal with the legal effect of this arrangement. Members might know that in the new bill we have to follow specific procedures, and our work is underway, and hopefully we can table it into LegCo for first and second readings. As for paragraph 14, we are dealing with applications for partial refund of stamp duty for exchange of properties, and again, a table has been compiled on Mr. To's request. You might find it surprised that there are applicants who make applications after 6 months, even though the eligible period for tax rebate is 6 months. We never said you have to apply to the ILD immediately. And for people who don't need immediate applications, they can file an application within 2 years. So the 6-month period has been satisfied, but the applicant is not that anxious for the money. So hopefully there won't be any misunderstanding when we interpret these figures.
Then is on the 15% stamp duty on the local property market listed in Annex B and C. As we mentioned, there are a number of transactions for first-hand, second-hand properties, prices, and so forth listed, so I'm not going into detail on that. As for implementation, for minors and people who are mentally incapacitated, the arrangements for them, well, the Indian Revenue Department will ask the people representing the minors to provide adequate proof or documents. If they are parents, then they should be able to produce the person's birth certificates. If they're not parents, then they should be authorized guardians as requested by law. So there are stringent requirements on the instruments that they need to present. As for people who are mentally incapacitated, similarly, any people representing them must follow the mental health ordinance requirements to get a court order or guardianship order before they can be the representatives. And the Inland Revenue Department will check all the proofs first before offering any exemptions. Paragraph 21 is about provision for substitute properties affected by redevelopment. So based on the members' request, we've listed out the data. And for church organizations, the exemptions for them, we are using the standard exemption arrangements. That is, unless it's a donation to a church organization, when exemption will be given. If not, then for any charitable organization buying a new property, there will be no exemption. Let me point out that for charitable organization, that is under Cap 88 of the Inland Revenue Ordinance, by September 2016, there are more than 8,000 such organizations, and more than 70% of them are actually registered or covered by the company ordinance. So again, we will adopt the same principle. If it's a self-purchased property, not a donation, then there will be no exemptions. Whether it's for the buyer's stamp duty or the first AVD, there have been detailed discussions on this aspect. As for other areas of implementation, that if someone says that he has made a statement that he is a Hong Kong permanent resident, and when he bought a property, did not own any other property, therefore the Inland Revenue Department did not charge him the 15%. But if it turned out that the statement was not true, then what would happen? That is, the ILD would chase that person for the stamp duty outstanding, or that he could, or the department could hold that person legally liable. And paragraph 27 on positive vetting. When we implement the measure on AVD, the administration proposed that they want to have negative vetting. But after a thorough discussion, ultimately the administration decided that because of members' concerns, it withdrew their plan. Therefore, the AVD, whether it were to be reduced or increased later on, we will have to get it done through a bill. And then on drafting items, that is Section 5 in the bill in relation to the drafting process. Let me explain that why that is in Section 5. It's mentioned that why there are the provision on other circumstances. We discussed it with the legal advisor in LegCo. When we did the drafting, we're thinking that for the purchase of non-residential property, we will use the original AVD for residential properties, or for the exchange of non-residential for residential property that will incur the 15%. These scenarios will be grouped under other circumstances. But as for the drafting process, DFJ colleagues could supplement, but our thinking was that it should be made clearly, legally, and also provisions should make it easy for implementation, because we don't want to have to get into any complications. So members, if you have other proposals, of course, we are happy to look further into it and see whether there's any room for improvement in the drafting itself. Thank you. Members, Mr. To? Okay, I'll just follow the order. Bank guarantee. Sorry, Chairman, your suggestion last time. I just found it strange that at the end of paragraph 6, you said that the IRD has to allocate lots of manpower and resources to keep up monitoring or continue monitoring of people who claim to be exchanging properties. But I don't see why you need to have additional extensive manpower to do the work of monitoring. So you say monitoring buyers to see whether in the 6-month period that they are dealing with the only property. And then, well, there will be the bank's guarantee, and you ask for the guarantee to be cancelled, and then, of course, there will be the cancellation of the loan, because if within the 6-month period, if the person cannot get any proof of selling property, then he would have the guarantee cancelled anyway. So why would you need additional manpower? I think whether it's for the bank guarantee or not, or it's in paragraph 5, the proposal that let's just hold it. The reason is under today's arrangement, from the day of assignment of getting a new property onwards, the 6-month period will be counted. But for first-hand property, if you are buying uncompleted flats, sometimes it could take 30 months for the flats to be completed. And then 30 months plus the 6-month period. Okay, look at the maximum length, right? Okay, so let's look at it as like 36 months. Then the IRD would claim that when the property wants to have the stamp duty on the ground that he's exchanging flats, we don't know. Later on, maybe the person will change his mind. Like today, if I want to buy and sell properties, and then have the property stamped, and that he will have the incentive to do it quickly. But if he's using bank guarantee, if the proposal is accepted, then the IRD will have the duty stamped first, and then if the person changes his mind, or if he really wants to make a change, or maybe he is a speculator and using the reason or excuse to avoid paying the 15%, then the IRD would need to, within the 36-month period, keep track of the person to see whether he's changed his mind. Most difficult to us is the instrument has been stamped, but you don't need to keep track of that person, because within the 36 months period, if he gives you an assignment and he cannot show to you agreement of purchase, then you are holding his bank guarantee. When the deadline approaches, then the computer would show on the screen the information, and then you can get the money from the bank. Okay, let me reorganize. This paragraph is about what is bank guarantee and when you have to pay up. Well, I understand your point on holding, but once you've paid the bank guarantee and then 6 months and then you can get the money. I think for detail, maybe the IRD colleague can supplement, but the bank guarantee you can hold by paying the bank guarantee. But let's give the IRD a chance. I think the administration does not quite understand the procedures involved in getting a bank guarantee. Firstly, the 30-month period of construction of flats before assignment is given. So there's no need for any 15% when the flat is being built. So it's only after the date of assignment when the buyer has to pay the 15%. So what's the meaning of having the 30-month period? The point is, after the 30-month period, he has to bear the burden of the 15%, then he has to get a bank guarantee. When the bank offers a guarantee, that person will be held financially, or will be under financial burden with the bank. And when the 6-month period is up, if that person has not cancelled the bank guarantee, that is, he has not produced any proof of exchanging properties to you, then you'll be in a position to cash up the stamp duty. And the bank will be obliged to do that. So why would you need extensive manpower to keep track of the person? It's all paperwork. Let me clarify. Under the current mechanism, even if a person is buying an uncompleted flat, he needs to pay 15% first before getting a refund. So he has to pay up first until that he has proved that he has had an exchange of properties. Then there can be a refund. Okay, if I want to buy an uncompleted flat to have a new flat, 15% is a lot of money. It's not like tens of thousands of dollars. Even if you pay, for 500, 600 square feet, it will cost $5 to $6 million. So 15% is a lot. $6 million may not be even enough. 15% will come to like $700,000 to $800,000. For a person to afford that, you have to work very hard to be able to afford that. You've save enough to buy the property, and yet you have to afford an additional, that amount of money to be paid to the IRD. So if you have a bank guarantee, then you can implement a policy while at the same time make it convenient, provide convenience for the public. So I think the administration should really seriously consider that. The bank guarantee, well, actually, I'm really speaking for you, the administration. But don't waste my, thinking on that. Mr. To, I understand the administration's point. I think what she's saying is that whether you are exchanging properties or not, you just assume that people are exchanging properties. Therefore, you can ask the bank to give the guarantee fee. And once that's done, if I change my mind later on, I would have saved, in extreme case, 36 months of cash flow. Well, banks have to make income. Yeah, but banks involving the bank guarantee, the guarantee fee will reflect some sort of interest payments. But if you are really afraid that the guarantee will be abused, then and the government would, of course, get 36 months less of interest, right? Because the interest is absorbed by the bank. So you are getting 36 months less of interest. I don't know whether you would look at it as sort of a source of revenue. So if there are several tens of billions of dollars being deferred, and that would lead to fiscal deficit. But even if you are worried about that, then, Chairman, why don't you stay in the provision of bank guarantee that if the money cannot be recovered, then the 3 months of interest can be charged. So that in that case, you would not lose the interest. Still, because they are still losing. Well, but if you can enforce the guarantee, so that the guarantee can include 3 years of interest, then that can be sort of a protection for the administration. Even in the worst case scenario, everyone uses bank guarantees to have exchange properties, and you can charge more in the beginning, and then that can avoid protection or provide protection for the administration.
Mr. Chung, well, you have said what I wanted to say. The table lists out properties between $4 to $6 million. I think that would be most affordable to most people. That is the relatively more affordable range, and 15% of that would be $900,000 for someone who buys a $6 million property. Then they have to pay another $900,000 to the IRD, and they have to wait another 6 months between the sum is rebated. So they face substantial pressure. With bank guarantees, these buyers can have a breather. Bank guarantees, well, banks might not charge interest. If the public needs to pay in order to receive bank guarantees, they would better off just pay the IRD directly. So banks might not receive interest. Well, but certainly the government would receive less interest, according to Mr. To. We are talking about a couple of months. I don't think the IRD has a lot more work to do. After receiving the payment, well, if you have to go through the internal process, you might even have more work to do. For those who exchange properties, you just need to call it off. So your workload has actually eased instead of tracing the routes of exchange of properties. I think this would offer more convenience to most people and give them less stress. We have said that the 15% stamp duty would stifle the supply, because if I want to exchange a property, I have to pay an extra stamp duty, and for a $6 million property, I have to pay another $900,000. That would further hurt the supply and raise property prices. So we are talking about measures that bring convenience to small property owners. The policy does not serve to stifle the property market. We just want the policy to facilitate those with no property. So that is a measure to guard against speculation. So this is a win-win situation. You can achieve your policy objective and offer convenience to the public. Currently, on the 6-month period of bank guarantees, this is beyond the scope of this bill, and the government has said that for multiple properties under one agreement, Well, we are talking about three things: multiple properties under the same agreement, the 6-month period, and bank guarantees. All three issues are out of the scope of the bill. So we are talking about multiple properties under the same agreement. Whether this should be relaxed to 6 months, 9 months, or 1 year, and is there a need to provide bank guarantees? Hopefully, when we come back next time, you would consider these issues altogether. Do members agree? All right, number 4 on the agenda. In paragraph 14 of the paper, the Deputy Secretary said, well, she said some people were not very anxious for the rebates. Well, of course, we are talking about substantial sums. Why did she say that some people were not that anxious? Well, we don't want any misunderstanding that people who exceed the 6-month period can still apply for a rebate. To be eligible for a refund, you have to fulfill the period for exchange of properties, or else you cannot apply for a rebate. In terms of the application period, we have said clearly that the longest application period is 2 years after you sign an agreement. Deputy Secretary. The table applies to exchanges that take place within 6 months. As to when we make such claims to the IRD, the deadline is 2 years. So exceeding 6 months refer to people who make claims to the IRD beyond 6 months but within 2 years. I think there's no need to overinterpret. I'm just referring to people who do not lodge applications immediately, all right? Mr. To? What about the issue of interest? Has that been solved? Since I've been away for a few minutes, no specific reply was offered. For multiple properties under the same agreement, the government will draft another. Well, please let me complete. For multiple properties under the same agreement, the government would draft something separately. When drafting the bill, I asked the government to consider different issues. First, whether there will be any relaxation from 6 months to 9 months or even a year. And number 2, bank guarantees. Are they considering it? If so, well, they should consider all these 3 issues when they draft the next bill. Multiple properties under the same bill, bank guarantees, and relaxation of the 6-month period. I understand what you mean. Well, myself and my assistants are considering the CSAs. So If the government said they would not do it, I would do it myself. Well, I would not ask you to consider it since there are no guarantees. Since you are going to raise the stamp duty to 15%, if there are things I can do, I would. No, well, I'm not asking you to support my bill. I was at the bathroom for 2 minutes. You said, well, you talked about monitoring, and the monitoring would not take place over a long time. Let's say 36 plus 24 months. Let's say it will take 2 months. Well, then we are talking about 60 months. If the guarantees would include interest of these 2 years, then the government would not lose out. And the banks would have to pay you 5 years of interest. That should be built into the bank guarantee. So why would you still say no? It's not that the government doesn't want to lose any interest revenue. That's not our top concern. In terms of exchange of properties, they have to pay this duty first before we provide rebates. We don't know how many of them are genuinely exchanging properties. Let's assume that a buyer might not genuinely want to exchange properties, and he would not have to pay 50% upfront. So for speculators, their costs might drop, and some members might talk about bank guarantees, but banks would not provide guarantees without return. They would request something like a handling fee, money, or mortgage. Deputy Secretary, for people exchanging properties, they would have an existing property. Banks are not stupid. If you can offer them your property, they will provide guarantees. Well, that's common sense for businessmen like us. I think this is no difference than taking out a transitional loan, Chairman. The charges for bank guarantees is very different from interest rates for loans. For bank guarantees, the liability is not paid out in cash. You can go to the electric company and pay deposit. Loans and guarantees are very, very different. Chairman. Let's say if we raise the stamp duty to 15% for smaller flats, and there are people which have to pay 10% extra in stamp duty. The original stamp duty rate is about 3% for small apartments. You just gave a point. You said for speculators, bank guarantees can defer payments for buyers, and the cost of circulation has gone down. That's why you would trigger buyers to use bank guarantees rather than using cash. That's what you meant. I cannot say that this is impossible, but if you have such concerns, compared with some people, well, they originally had to pay about 4%, and now it has gone up to 15%, and they cannot take out bank guarantees, and they might have to obtain bridging loans. We hope that the bank guarantees can help some people. So you are just assessing these two risks. Do you think that by not paying 15% upfront, you will encourage speculators? Let's not talk about other forms of stamp duty like SSD. So if if we are coming to that, well, those other measures are already in place. So you said the stamp duty does not have to be paid upfront, but then bank guarantees are still needed, and you said that this is an important factor.
Well, RD is good at calculating. So if there are cases of unavailability of tax refund, and as you said that's not your concern, and you're saying that speculators would need to pay up the difference, well, would you actually reconsider your stance? The world now is such that for great speculators, people don't understand what I'm saying, and then sometimes those who understand what I'm saying would hold the government responsible for actually being biased and not having reasonable ground. Yes, I think all I can say is that I've explained our concerns. Members may have different views. Well, anyway, please reconsider the views expressed by members today, and really think about whether we are reasonable and whether we have really told you the facts. I believe, is people who come up with policies for the sake of good governance and public benefits. And we want to make things easy and convenient for the public. I'm not saying that the administration is being stubborn. We do hope to, talk reason after all. Mr. To, my next question is well, there are other follow-up issues indeed. Paragraph 11. Chairman, the administration said that under the new, this is about the provisional or the arrangements, exemption arrangements under the new measure. But CSA, did you say that for a new bill, it needs to address the issue of having multiple transactions under one agreement, and you need a new bill to tackle that? And if we want to use a bill to plug the existing loophole, I think we can finish the whole thing in 1 to 2 meetings. Once we've plugged the loophole, and this is something that the society is most concerned with. So is it better to have another bill which requires first, second readings and the formation of a new bills committee, and that will be more time consuming? Then would you go ahead in plugging this loophole first to address public concern? Yes, I think we have considered this already, but because we're talking about something that is beyond the scope of the proposed bill, therefore we think that we cannot deal with the loophole through CSA. If we can use CSA, we would rather go down that route than having a new bill. The bill only talk about raising the stamp duty to 15%, and that adopting a system mechanism for having exemptions, whether in the long title or whether in the speech by the Secretary in second reading. So we, having considered the facts, we thought that we could not just address it through CSA alone. Mr. To, in paragraph 11, you need to pay attention that on April 2017, the government has introduced an order to introduce a new measure on new residential properties. So it's up to us to enact the laws. Once the law is enacted, the legislation will be put in place. So we have plugged the loophole. Chairman, you believe in executive orders, but I don't share the same view as you. I mean that unless LegCo members have different views or we all opposed to such an enactment, we're talking about technical issues here, but there are two technical perspectives here. If you are to submit to us a new bill, you said that because the existing pieces of legislation are not broad enough in their scope. So on April 11, the announcement made by the government, was it intended to plug the loophole under current legislations? That you're not going to deal with other loopholes because it's only in AVD. That is when you're a Hong Kong permanent resident, you're buying one residential property. It's not about loophole. We are trying to deal with the issues arising out of the new 15%. All along, stamp duty is handled in the form of an instrument. But when you have one instrument to cover multiple transactions, an exemption currently or previously have been allowed for, therefore we try to address that issue. Our attention was not to tackle problems in other pieces of legislation. Okay. I don't know whether you've really studied other legislation dealing with DSD or all kinds of Ds. So in previous legislations or previous measures, they do not lead to issues of multiple transaction under one agreement. In previous legislations, they would not actually adopt the 15% stamp duty. But in previous measures, you studied that those measures, did not or were not related to the issue of multiple transactions under one agreement, right? So I just wanted to know for previous measures on these, I also saw the problem of having multiple transactions under one agreement. I think the same problem existed in the past. And in the past, we discussed this issue of multiple transactions under one agreement. And administration explained that when you buy a residential property with a rooftop or car parking spaces, if there are several agreements involved, and that means more than one property. And yet now, people were taking advantage of that to have one instrument covering various residential units. So one agreement covering multiple units, purchase of multiple units. Chairman, of course I understand that even before 2017, in 2015-16, the same problem actually was around. So you are saying that the new bill would address the 15% issue. But let me say it here that let's put this on record. I do not agree with your view that, if the bill would not, I think you should have dealt with the same problem that occurred in the measures introduced in 2012, 2013 on various Ds. If you say that current provision actually the addressing of the multiple transactions under one agreement is beyond the scope of the latest measure, then I think that, well, I don't agree with that, because you could change the long title to broaden the scope. It's easy. I think you can ask my assistant to do it, or you can ask the legal advisor to do that. I don't think that the long title itself would require the formation of a new, or the drafting of a new bill and formation of a new bills committee. I think you can have the existing legislation dealing with the current loophole. Okay, let us hear from the administration what it plans to do. If you do not agree, I will tell my colleagues, or we will try to have a resolution next time to have CSA to the current legislation, including changing the long title. You can't change the long title, I think. Yeah, I think you can't change the long title of a bill. I think what James To said, I think I think what the administration is doing now is I think the government is under pressure to address the issue of having multiple transactions under one agreement. But every time we, over the years from 2011 till now, every time the James To raised the same concerns, but the administration did not pay any attention to him. So it's really good time now, good opportunity now for the administration to review the situation. You know, how much money have been wasted. You know, you could have, you know, when you introduced DDDs, you could have actually addressed the loophole back then. Well, it's too late now to regret. Well, it's too late now, but we just have to get the administration to resolve the issue ASAP. But I agree. The long title concern cannot address all concerns. But anyway, item 4 of the agenda. After the last meeting, the administration explained to members the exemptions, the government over exemptions, CBS 823-16-1701. The administrations gave us a letter on tightening up of exemption arrangement under the new residential stamp duty regime, and the administration will give us a new bill to talk about the exemption arrangement, and also a new paper on the exemption arrangements. And just then the administration had taken us through the letter dated April 12th, and we had much discussion on it already just then. So I think for the next meeting, let's extend this meeting by 15 minutes. Well, I only have one question anyway. I also have other matters to deal with. Yes. Okay. Well, I can ask it next time. Sorry. Well, if that's the case, then our next meeting is scheduled on June 6th, Tuesday, 10:45 in the morning. So the Secretariat would issue notices to you afterwards. The next meeting will basically finish any outstanding issues, and also will see the administration's response on setting up a new bills committee, and also get members' views. Then at the next meeting, we can begin our clause-by-clause scrutiny of the latest bill. So administration, please prepare the papers first and try to table the papers to us ASAP. Don't table to us, but circulate the papers to us ASAP. So meeting adjourned. Thank you all.